In this video, we're going to, unsurprisingly at this point, make another class. Now, the employee class that we made and the product class that hopefully you made were a little bit more trivial. There wasn't really a ton going on in there. Feels different because it's new, but no crazy code. We're going to get a little bit more complicated right now, but still following the exact same steps we've been practicing up until now. What we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a voting machine program. Let's click here. And whoa, this definitely looks a bit more complicated. Look, on this first line, I'm declaring an instance or a variable called machine. And what is this an instance of is a class called VotingMachine. What does a voting machine do? It's kind of the idea of you're voting in a yes or no sort of election. So what are your only options to vote are vote yes and vote no. You can also, funny enough, rig the election. So this is a method we're going to have to write. It looks like in total I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 methods that I'll need to write. Let's get started. Let's create a new class. Let's call this voting machine. And I'm going to drag it over here to be next to the voting machine program. All right, I'm going to do that little trick where I click this and move this to a new window just so I can look at both of them at the same time. Not that. A little too big. Let's make the text a bit smaller. Oh, maybe that'll make it easier for me to look at everything. There we go. Okay, so to start, what is always our first step when we're creating a class? It's to do the method signatures. Let's start by looking at the constructor. Do I need to change anything about my constructor? No, actually my constructor looks good, right? This takes no parameters, so I don't need to put anything here. Great, check that box. What's the first voting machine method that's used? I think it's this one here, machine.voteYes. Now, what's going to be the return type of this method? It should be void because this method is happening on a line by itself. So let's do public void vote yes is the name. And does it take any parameters? No. All right, let's do the next method. It looks like here I have a method called vote no. Public, this is also going to be a void method because it's on its own line. Vote no, which also has no parameters. The next one I've got, machine.rigElection. Looks like that's also going to be void. So let's do public void rig election. What type is going to be this parameter? It looks like I have one. That should be a double. And we're going to call this the rig factor. This is actually going to rig things in favor of the yes vote. So this is going to move a certain portion of the no votes over to yes. All right, let's do machine.getYes%. What does this probably return? Is probably a double. So let's do public void, public double get yes%. Takes no parameters. We also have public double get no%. And our very last one is public. What does get winner probably return? Wouldn't it be yes or no? So let's make this a string get winner. Okay, now we've got our method signatures. Our step 0 is done. Let's do step 1. As we get into more and more difficult classes, often step 1 ends up being the trickier critical thinking sort of step. I would argue that I could really teach anybody how to do step 0 pretty quickly, but step 1 takes a bit of critical thinking. What kind of things does a voting machine need to keep track of? It needs to know the number of yes votes and the number of no votes. So let's do this. Up here, private instance variables, private. What type are the number of yes and no votes? Probably ints. You can't really have half a vote. So let's do private int num yes and private int num no. Notice how I, again, did not give these values up here. Where do I give these variables values? In the constructor. And that's because what's the job of the constructor? To initialize the private instance variables. I feel very Dora the Explorer right now. I'm like calling and responding, call and response to somebody who I cannot see. All right, there's my private instance variables. I'm going to give them values inside the constructor. When the vote first starts, when I've kind of booted up the voting machine for the first time, how many votes have been cast? Hypothetically, none. So let's do num yes equals 0 and num no equals 0. And let's get started on step 2. We're adding code into our methods to make everything work. How do I vote yes? Well, num yes better go up by 1. Num yes plus 1. How do I vote no? Well, num no better increase by 1. Num no equals num no. No plus 1. Let's save rigging the election just because this one's a little bit more involved. Let's think about the get yes percent. How do I get the percent of votes that are yeses? Isn't it the total number of yes votes divided by the overall number of votes? And because I have double here, aren't I returning this value? So let's start with the keyword return. And since this is a percent, I'm going to do this and type it exactly as I do. 100.0 times num yes divided by parentheses num yes plus num no. Those parentheses are really important. Java will obey order of operations, and this division will happen before the addition here, so you do need to put that in parentheses. All right, get no percent. I could write a line very similar to this one, but let me kind of show you a fun little thing you can do too. Return 100.0 minus get yes percent. Am I allowed to do this? Yeah, I totally can. Get yes percent is a method that exists in this class, and I can use it if I want to. And then let's do get winner. How do I figure out the winner? Well, it depends on the number of votes. If num yes is greater than num no, then who's the winner? We're going to return yes. If I get to this else here, it could mean that the no votes have it. What else could be happening though? Couldn't there be a tie? So let's actually do another if statement. Let's make this a nested if just to cover all of the cases. If num no is greater than num yes, let's return no. Else, if we get here, we've eliminated the possibility that yes wins or no wins, so we're going to return tie. All right, now that method that we've been kind of looking at and thinking about, rigging the election. How is this going to work? Well, again, I'm stealing votes from the no to then put in the yes. Let's do this. Let's say int stolen votes equals, this rig factor here was 0.2. What that means is I'm going to take 20% of the votes that are in no, and I'm going to put them in yes. How am I going to get 20% of the no votes? Is the rig factor times the number of no's. And you'll notice right off the bat, it's actually going to get mad at this. Couldn't the rig factor times the number of no votes actually be a decimal, right? Like if I'm trying to get 0.2 of the votes and I have 7 total votes in no, this is actually going to be some sort of decimal. But I said that stolen votes was going to be an int. So this is what's happened, is Java's actually getting mad at me because the types don't actually match here. There's actually one easy thing that you can do to make sure that this number is an integer. And that's that you can do this. Now, what am I actually doing here? This is called a typecast. I'm taking this value that could be a double and I'm forcing it into the box where it's an int. Now, to be really, really specific here, The way that a typecast works when you typecast from a double into an int is it throws away the decimal. This is not rounding. So if I have the number 4.2, that's then going to become 4 stolen votes. If I have 5.99, that's going to become 5 stolen votes. So again, I just throw away the part that's the decimal completely and give the whole number. Now that we have how many votes we are stealing, let's add them into num yes and take them away from num no. So I'm going to do num yes equals num yes plus stolen votes, and num no equals num no minus stolen votes. You'll notice that if you actually did put in a negative number for the rig factor, it would rig it in favor of the no's instead of the yeses. All right, and we should be able to compile this. And again, you might have to add a space to, or kind of change your program somehow for a voting machine program to be able to compile it. Let's run this. Ooh, this one. And there we go. You end up getting that the yeses had it after rigging the election 54% to 45%. Now that we have this voting machine class, could I make a new voting machine on the instance shelf? Yeah, I actually totally can. If you do this, call it VM, and there it is on the instance shelf. There's my voting machine. In the same way we could do this with classes that somebody else had made, we can do it with our own classes too. Let's vote no a few times. Let's vote yes a few times. And let's see what's the no percent. Great, looks like 2/3 of the votes are for no's. Let's go ahead and rig the election. Let's do 0.8. And let's look at the no percent now, and it looks like it went down quite a bit. I'm going to get rid of this. You'll notice that I actually gave you another voting machine program, actually called another voting machine program. Let's open that up, and again, add a space. What type of program is this? It's actually a graphics program. So let's compile, and let's run this. And look, ooh, this is actually a vote for yes, and this one's actually a vote for no. You can see the percentages changing up here. What do you think this little cyan button in the middle does? Is it actually rigs the election. Ooh, kind of fun. Now we're getting a little closer to what's going to be the first test of the year. One of the problems on this test is going to be this. Imagine I gave you the voting machine program. Could you write the voting machine class with possibly some description of kind of how the methods were supposed to work? What if I gave you the voting machine class and actually asked you to write the voting machine program? Could you do that? Those are actually two of the questions that are going to be on your upcoming test. And again, we've seen kind of over and over again, we're practicing the skill of making our own class, constantly looking at these 3 steps. Oh, look here, the job of the constructor is to initialize the private instance variables. There's a lot of other ones here too that are important. We always have been making all of our methods public and keeping our private instance variables private. One thing I want to point out with that actually, let's go ahead and look at the voting machine class. We made a variable here called stolen votes. Is this a private instance variable? No, it's just a local variable that lives inside of the rig election method. It's not a private instance variable. The private instance variables are up here, they're global, and they keep track of the state of my voting machine. This doesn't really do much to keep track of the state of my voting machine. It's just a temporary variable that I made to be able to grab the number of votes that I'm stealing so that I can correctly rig it. Let's look at some of the other ones here. We haven't really seen this first one all that much. Let's look at this. Void methods don't return a value. All other methods must return a value. We've definitely seen that. And we saw this when we first started talking about classes. Classes are like the nouns. They're the objects. They're all things. The methods that belong to them are like the verbs. Those are the actions. In the next video, we'll continue on with another example of creating a new class. That time, we're actually not going to start from a program. We're going to create both the class and the program.